My name's Joan McGinley. I'm the Director of International Student and Scholar Services. Today we have Nina Campoloni and Sharon Logren, and we're all going to talk to you about the different visa statuses that you might encounter when you're looking to hire someone and go into some of the nitty-gritty of them. So without further ado.
Next screen.
There's our contact information. That's a general account. So if you were to email Sharon, Sharon or me and get an away message, you might want to shoot it over to ISSS@temple.edu so that it can be forwarded to whoever else is in the office that might be able to handle it. Martin is our boss. He is the Assistant Vice President for the Office of Global Engagement, and there's his contact information. I'm the director. I have a hand in a lot of stuff with the J's and the students and such. And then we have Sharon, who does the other employment visa classifications. And those are our direct telephone numbers. Next slide. So there's a lot of alphabet acronyms with the Immigration Service. We have DHS, the Department of Homeland Security. That's where we send all of our petitions for HTN for people who are in the United States, or if they're abroad and they're going to be getting a visa. They go to USCIS, the Immigration Service. Any petition that we submit, whether it's a student submitting an application for employment so they can work, or an extension of an H or a TN, they start there. And then depending on where the person is physically, they might go to the embassy to get a visa, or just stay in the US and have their status extended. The Department of Labor, we are required to file a labor condition application for H's, E3s, not TNs, for a couple of things. And we need to make sure, what?
I was going to say, sometimes we do file TNs if they don't want to travel.
Right.
So, yeah.
So we have to make sure that we're paying them the actual or the prevailing wage. It really gets confusing for people, because the actual wage is what people are getting in our area and at the university. The actual wage is what all the people are getting at Temple. So a research scholar, associate scientist, they should all be making, depending on their experience, pretty much the same salary. The prevailing wage is what other people in this area make. So it can't be a national survey like the postdoc survey. It has to be a regional thing. And so when we file a labor condition application, we need to make sure that we're paying the higher of the two. So that's why sometimes you get a call from Sharon, or FCC gets a call from me saying, you got to raise the salary, or the salary is not high enough and we need to do whatever we need to do. It's not meeting the prevailing wage. So Customs CBP, Customs and Border Protection, that's who lets people into the US at the airport. We have ICE, that are occasionally referred to as the police of the USCIS. That's the group of people who will actually come to people's houses or the office or anything like that. And the Department of State is the authority for visa issuance. They also are in charge of the J program and advisory opinions. So anyone in J status, their programs are overseen by the Department of State. Next slide. So we are not in charge of all things international. We do immigration, just immigration. We can tell you stuff all day long about immigration statuses. We cannot determine a job title. We don't do taxes. We don't even do our own taxes. All of these items are more of a payroll or human resources. But basically, if it doesn't come down to an immigration status or maintenance of status or extending status, we actually don't have any authority to handle it. So next slide. Premium processing fees going up again, but fortunately, well, one of our visa statuses is not going to be hit. So all premium processing fees for anything filed with an I-129 are going up from 2,500 to 2,805, effective February 6th. The actual filing fee, the I-129 form, the fee that goes with that is going to stay the same for H1 because we're nonprofit. The O1, you can see, is going up to 530. E3 and TN will go up to 510. Our website will be updated to reflect these fees, so you can circle back to it. The I-539 is a fee that's most often used for our people who are in H&O for their dependents. So they'll be doing for a change of status, an extension, and students who are in F1 status use it for a reinstatement. And that fee is going to go from 420, no, what is it? Whatever it is now, it's funny, I can't think,
370.
410? What?
370.
470? Yes.
370.
I have, well, luckily I haven't done an
No.
I-539 in a long
A
time.
long time. Yeah,
Mine
that's
are
good.
mostly reinstatements. So there's a way to file it online, and there's a way to file it with paper. So if you're going to file it online, it's going up to 420. And if you're going to file it by paper, it's going up to 475. And the same for an I-765. It's going from 410 to 420 if you file online, 410 to 475 if you want to do a paper application, which nobody really does anymore. Next slide. So F1 and J1 students. Next slide. Across the country, there are F1 and J1 students, and everyone who is in F1 status is eligible after being in status for an academic year for one of two types of practical training. Next slide. There's a type of employment authorization called curricular practical training. So our students here at Temple will not be using curricular practical training to work at Temple. Our students are on campus. They have on-campus employment authorization. You want to hire them as a TA, a student worker, whatever they're going to be doing for you. That's plain old on-campus work. They're allowed to do it 20 hours a week while school's in session, more during breaks. I've never seen an upper limit, so I always just say more than that during winter, spring, and summer breaks. Where you would come into a student who's talking about curricular practical training, and this came up last week, is you are working with your, the researcher wants to hire a student at Drexel. And that student would be working here either during the semester or the summer. So that student would go talk to their international student office and say, I have an opportunity at Temple. Can I accept it? So they would say, is it required by your program? Is it required by a course? Is it required? There's like 5 ways of saying required. And if this employment is curricular in nature, that school could authorize them to work at Temple. So that's where you would see a curricular practical training student. Next slide. Optional practical training is a 12-month employment opportunity directly related to their field of study that they can choose to use while they're in their program or after they finish. So if you were to talk to that student at Drexel and they went and spoke with their international office and said, could I take this opportunity? And they said, you can't use curricular practical training because this opportunity is in no way required by your program. So you're not eligible for CPT. It's related to your major, but it's not required in any capacity. In that case, they would have to decide, do I want to dip into my practical training because it's still directly related to my field of study and it is an opportunity. If you use any optional practical training, or if they use any optional practical training, it's deducted from that 12-month nest egg. So most students don't want to use it unless it's a really, really, really good opportunity. So with OPT, they divide it into pre-completion and post-completion. Someone on pre-completion can work here from another school. Again, people here are generally going to be on-campus employment, unless, and this is where we get to post-completion OPT. You've got a fantastic TA, you want to hire him after he finishes his program. He can't use curricular because he's all done his program. He can only use practical training, post-completion practical training. So if he didn't use any practical training prior to finishing his program, he's got 12 months. If he subsequently approaches you and says, I want to apply for a STEM extension, that's science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, you have to say, I'm sorry, we can't do a STEM extension because while your major is STEM, Temple University is not enrolled in the E-Verify program. So if we want to continue with this person, he can work here for the full 12 months of post-completion OPT, but at the end of those 12 months, and actually at least probably 6 or 7 months into his employment, you want to start discussing his next opportunity if he's going to stay at Temple. Because again, we're not enrolled in the E-Verify. He's not going to be able to do a STEM extension. So you're either going to do an H, or maybe he's Canadian and you could do a TN or other opportunities, but not STEM. Next slide. So I kind of hit most of this again. Any employment that's engaged in during the semester is generally kept at 20 hours or less. Breaks, they go over 20 hours. And post-completion is another, it's still OPT. Whatever they haven't used during their program, they have that much time up to 12 months after their program. Next slide. So while they're on practical training, they are required, or they're not allowed to accrue 90 days of unemployment. So some students will get lucky and they'll have paid employment. Some will do unpaid internships, and that's fine. They can work with OPT. They can work for as many employers as they want to, and with just the EAD card. These requirements are not the same as STEM. Can you, next slide? So you can have unpaid employment during your post-completion OPT, but during your STEM extension, you have to have paid employment. You can submit your application. As long as you submit the STEM application before your OPT expires, you get 180 days to continue working while you are waiting for that STEM extension to get approved. CPT may be authorized by the institution. Yeah, that's the good thing about curricular practical training. Like if you have that student who's studying at Drexel and wants to work here at Temple, if they have a curricular requirement, the International Student Advisor can actually authorize the employment. So there's like a much shorter waiting period. Next slide. And academic training is very similar to curricular practical training, in that the school authorizes it. You are allowed to be in academic training for 18 months, or the length of your program, or 18 months, whichever is shorter. So if you're only here for a year, you get a year. If you're here for 18 months, you get 18 months. If you're in a doctoral program, you would get the whole 36 months. And that doesn't go, there's no STEM, you don't have to be in the E-Verify program. And again, the good thing for that is the person in J status talks to their responsible or alternate responsible officer, generally fill out an application. It's always required by their, directly related to their field of study, and it gets authorized by the university. Next slide. So the hiring department will not need to complete an application in Destiny 1 for any F1 or J1 student. They will be hired, whatever your capacity you're hiring them in. and then they will get the email to do the I-9, and they fill it out. There's no visa sponsorship from Temple, so there's no paperwork that we have to do. Next slide. So this slide is basically telling you, like what I was saying earlier about the OPT and the practical training. If let's say their practical training, optional practical training expires April 1st. On April 2nd, they have to have a different employment authorization. They need to be able to get to the HR office or do the the I-9 that next day with their new employment authorization. So if you're thinking about moving this person from F1 or J1 to H, you want to plan ahead. You want, like I said, about 6 or 7 months into the year, you want to start looking at the H or maybe TN. But anyway, you want to start looking into this. You make sure that the job requires a minimum of a bachelor's degree and that the individual has that degree. So it's a degree in chemistry, and the person has a degree in chemistry. Just matchy matchy.
Okay. So I'm going to take over for H's. Can you advance the slides? So I just wanted to put this out there. This is a very short pilot program from Department of State that certain H-1s who already have an H-1B visa stamp in their passport, if they meet the conditions, they can renew their visa, the visa stamp in their passport in the US. It's a very small amount of people, but we're really hoping that Department of State will go back to renewing visas in the US. They used to do it, I don't know, prior to 2000 or something. So fingers crossed. But I wanted to make sure you guys knew that. Next. Okay. There's a reason why this is like one of the first slides under H-1B. If someone is subject to the 2-year home residency, or if they ever held J-1 status, we have to make sure that they are not subject to the 2-year home residency. So in the H-1B application, I have this, one of the first first things that they have to do. It's really important that they have something from the Department of State, an advisory opinion that says they're not subject, or if they were subject, that they have a waiver from the Department of State and USCIS, or that they have fulfilled it back in their home country. So just know that this is really critical, and there's a reason why it is like one of the first things in the H-1B application. Next, okay. For J-1s who are in the US at Temple, they should talk to Joan or myself before they apply for a waiver. We don't want someone necessarily in their first year applying for a waiver. So just have them talk to us before they do it. Next. So this I wanted to include because we have a lot of J scholars that go to H1. And this sort of like outlines this transition. So the first year 1 and 2 is a good time for your department to see if this person is a good fit. If they are, then year 3, we would love for the department to extend them all the way to the end of the 5th year that they're allowed in J status. If for whatever reason you can't do that because of funding, let's say, then this person should not apply for a waiver until they're extended longer. Year 4, really, hopefully at this point, you're willing to do a 2-year J for them so that they can go to the end of the 5th year, and they should apply for a waiver no later than the middle of the 4th year in J status, because it's taking at least a year to get a waiver. It's crazy long. And then at least 3 months before their J program is going to end, ideally 6 months. you should be giving me an application for an H-1B. Next. So right now, the fees are $460, $500, and $2,500 if you want a premium process. Those fees will change, so be prepared. We will update our website, like Joan said, so that you can just look back and see what they are. Next. So if someone is outside the US and they're going to come as an H-1B, we have to go through the whole application process. They get the approval notice from immigration. I send it to them abroad. They get a visa stamp, unless they're Canadian, and then they enter. This could take, maybe a month and a half if you're really, really lucky, or it could take 4 months. So when people ask me what start date, it's hard to say, because if it takes them 2.5 months to get the visa stamp, that's what it takes. If they're in the United States, we can simply do a change of status. And in that case, they don't have to leave. And once they get the original approval notice and it's the H-1B start date, they can start working as long as HR says they can start working. Mm-hmm. Next. If someone is already in H-1B status with another employer, once we file the petition and immigration receives it, and it's the H-1B start date, they can start working at Temple. They don't have to have an approval to start working here. If someone's already an H-1B at Temple and we file an extension petition, once immigration receives their H-1B petition prior to their H-1B end date, they get to work for up to 240 days after their current expiration date, as long as they don't travel outside the US. Best practice, submit an H-1B application as soon as possible, up to 6 months ahead of time. We can't file it before 6 months. Next. You can look at our website. If you click up here, you can see, it'll take you to the website. Right now, and that is right now, the applications are taking between 2 to 3 months, but April 1st is the date that USCIS will start working with all the CAPS subject people for H's, and so expect some kind of delay. Usually, I was going to say, if you go back, most initial H-1Bs, be prepared to pay premium processing. And that's like the $2,500, which is going up to $2,805, plus $460, plus $500. Next. H-4 dependents who are outside the U.S. have to get a visa and they enter. If they're in the U.S., they have to file an H-4 application along with our H-1B petition. Next. If you go to our website, I'm not sharing the screen, but if you go to these two websites, we have a ton of information there about what departments will need for H-1B applications. So please review these websites. If you have questions, let me know. Next. So for people who are on OPT and are going to an H, so the person starts working on OPT. Once they have, I'd say about 6 months into their H-1B. I should go back a minute. Once someone has their EAD and it's at least the start date on the EAD, they can start working at Temple. They don't come through our office. You just have them fill out the I-9, they start working. About 6 months into their OPT, you want to have them well, you want to start the H-1B application for them. I really can't stress how it's important to let me know once you've decided you want to keep this person on OPT, because then I can like look at their documents and tell you how soon you should start working on the H. Next. So this is just a list of things that department will have to upload into the H application. The required fees, you're either going to order checks or you're going to fill out a G1450 form for each check and send that to me through secure email. The completed control tech form, make sure you always look at our website for the most recent version. You're going to email it to me and you're going to upload it in the application. You have to upload a copy of the job offer letter if it's faculty. If it's someone who's a postdoc, it's going to come from Nina. She'll do it herself. HR has to email me a copy of the job offer letter. The department has to do the actual wage for faculty and postdocs. HR has to do it for any HR hires. The department has to upload job description for faculty and postdocs. HR will do it for HR hires. They'll just send it to me. Next. So Joan kind of touched on the actual wage and the prevailing wage. But if we do tell you you have to pay more, this is why. Next. Very important, you list every possible work site that this person may work at. Even if you're not really sure, list it. It's fine if they never work there, but if they do work there, it has to be listed on the LCA. Wait, go back for a minute. Sort of in the middle here, if someone, let's say you have them working remotely and they live in Arizona, that is going to be a different prevailing wage than if they lived in Philadelphia. You may have to pay them more because it's more expensive to live in Tucson, let's say. So be aware if you're doing people who are like remote, things could be difficult. Just warning you. Next. These are things the applicant has to upload. One of the things right in the middle is the academic credentials evaluation. So if someone did their degree, like let's say it's a postdoc, and they did their PhD abroad, they have to upload a credentials evaluation that meets our requirements. And we have those requirements on our website. The rest of this, it's pretty obvious what it is. If someone needs a license, they have to have it. And they have to explain how they are not subject or if they have a waiver. Next. So once I have a complete application, I send the control tech form to Dwayne in Vice Provost office for research. No. Is that what it, okay, yeah. Begin the labor LCA, really, process. That takes at least 7 days. So be patient. There's nothing I can do about that. That's what it takes. Once I have the certified LCA, I'll send a copy to the applicant and the hiring department. The LCA, the H-1B has to approve, certify it, say it's okay. Then we start working on the actual application. That could take a few days, particularly if we need things. We attach the checks and send it via UPS to immigration. If we're doing premium processing, understand that it can take 15 days to get an answer. An answer could be an approval, but it could also be a request for further information. So they want to see more evidence. And then once I get the actual approval notice, I will let the department know, HR, and the applicant. Next. Let's say that you have someone who's a postdoc and you want to change them to an associate scientist. We have to file an H-1B amendment petition first, and once immigration receives it, they could start the new job. Next. So we can request up to 3 years per H-1B petition. We prefer to file for 3 years because it's less work for everyone, but we'll only file for the length of a postdoc letter and a faculty letter. So if you want a 3-year H, you have to file, like give Nina a 3-year postdoc letter. The most they can stay in H-1B status is 6 years, except for there are some exceptions. But ultimately, USCIS determines how long they're going to grant H-1B status. Next. So some people can file beyond the 6 years. Number one, we can try to recapture time that someone has spent outside the US. They can reset the H-1B clock, which means they go outside the US for a full year, and then they can get a whole new 6 years. Or, depending upon when they filed a green card, we could potentially file a 7th year petition for them, or we could file for 3 years for a 7th year petition. So either way, we really recommend that someone in H-1B status starts the green card process in their 5th year if they want to stay here. Because if you're filing stuff in your 6th year, it's getting dicey and you may have to go off employment and leave the United States. Next. Anyone who wants to work for Temple outside the US does not hold US immigration status, so our office is not involved. However, University Council, OVPR, Faculty Affairs all have to be aware that this person's outside the US. Nancy Hinchcliffe in HR has to be told, and she has this new software that determines certain things. I don't know, but everything has to go through Nancy Hinchcliffe if someone's going to work outside the US. Next. If someone wants to work outside the US, but Temple is filing for a green card for them, they have to also reach out to their HR generalist because that could be pretty tricky. Next. So if someone in H-1B status wants to take a job somewhere else and they're voluntarily leaving, not a problem. If, however, you are going to terminate their employment for whatever reason, you have to let me know right away. There's certain things that have to happen, including our office has to withdraw our H-1B, and the department has to file a check for the cost of return transportation. If those things don't happen, this person has not technically been terminated, and your department could be held liable for backdated salary. So you really don't want to not contact me if you terminate someone. Next. Okay. So TN NAFTA is only for Canadian and Mexican nationals. So it's very limited who it applies to. Next. TNs is very job specific. So whoever's petitioning it, that's all they can work for. They can have multiple employers, but multiple employers have to have petition for them. TN does not have dual intent. So we really don't recommend people in TN status applying for a green card. And not all positions are available for a TN. So there's a list on our website of very specific fields that we could do a TN for. And of course, they have to have the right degree and license. Next. Again, it's really job specific. So if someone had a TN, we did a TN for dentistry, and let's say now they want to do art history, we have to notify immigration one way or another. They cannot just switch jobs. Next. These are just some of the jobs that we could do. So there's scientist, research assistant, engineers, dentists, psychologists, and faculty. Again, we would not recommend a TN for tenure track faculty. Next. This is just the things that someone would have to have at the border. So let's say someone's in Canada, we give them this list of things. I issue them a TN support letter. They show up at the border. They hopefully get everything they need and they come in as a TN. Note that Mexican nationals have to get a visa stamp from a US consulate first. They can't just come in like Canadians do. Next. Oh, I just said that. Okay, next. TNs can be admitted for up to 3 years. Extensions of stay are also 3 years. You could technically be a TN for a long time, but if the immigration people start thinking you're not ever leaving or you're going to keep working here, they may not let you in at some point. There's no limit on how many Canadians or Mexicans can come in as TNs. Next. TN is great in many ways because it doesn't cost the department anything and it's much faster than an H. Next. This is Joan.
Okay. J1 exchange visitors. Next. So the J1 exchange visitor program is for non-immigrants who will be here temporarily. It's appropriate for people who are going to be doing research. It's not appropriate for someone who doesn't have a bachelor's degree yet. It cannot be for a tenure track appointment. Medical residency, there's a ECFMG is for that group of individuals. They're not supposed to go through the HR office or pursue U.S. permanent residency in exchange status. I mean, it's a someone who's coming here in J status is supposed to have no intentions of remaining permanently in the U.S. Next. As of January 1st, 2024, if you are in J status, you're a research scholar or professor, you can only work from home 2 out of 5 days a week. That's in the regulations. So no more remote work. Next. There are several categories to the J. The ones that we have authorization to use are listed here. We have the professor and research scholar are kind of not interchangeable, but they're very similar to each other. They're allowed to have 5 years, nothing beyond 5 years, 3-week minimum, 5-year maximum. There is what's called a 1-year bar and a 24-month bar on repeat participation. So if someone is here for more than 6 months of a 5-year program and they leave for whatever personal or whatever reason, they're not permitted to come back to the US in J status for 24 months. If they're here in J status and they're here for over 6 months but less than a year, they can't come back for 12 months. The only exception to that, what? The only exception?
I was just going to jump in real quick and say, this is so confusing, so just keep that in mind. But anyone who comes in day one as a research scholar or professor is actually subject to this 5-year ban. Sorry, that's 24-month ban. So it's really critical that the person who's coming as a J understands that. We've had like a person come in for 1 day and someone in his family got really sick and he had to stop his program. And then he was like barred for 2 years to come back as a research scholar. So I just wanted to make that really clear as it can be, because it's not clear.
Well,
it's hard.
That's why we have that question on the J application so that we can head that issue off. I mean, we can't do anything if they come and have to leave early, but we do have those questions on the J application so that we can, you know, make sure we're not trying to do documentation for someone that's not going to be eligible. So the short-term scholar is not, they're only allowed to be here for 6 months, absolutely no extension, and they have a 6-month bar and repeat participation. The J1 student intern, we actually use that quite a bit. That is for someone who is in a program of study in their home country, and they have a requirement to do research or an activity at 4 credit to help them finish their degree. So they have to be in a program and they have to have this need. So 3-week minimum, 12-month maximum, there's no extensions. And then there's the specialist. I think we've used this about 6 times in 30 years. For someone who's coming to observe, consult, demonstrate his or her highly specialized knowledge or skills, 3-week minimum, 1-year maximum. Next. These are the basic requirements. They have to be proficient in English. We have a TU TEP, a test of Temple University test of English proficiency that we run in our office, free, gets done pretty quickly. Health insurance is actually a mandatory part of the J visa. Unlike any other visa classification, if you are not maintaining health insurance, you are not maintaining your status. And everybody has to come and be able to demonstrate before we issue the DS 2019 that they have sufficient funding. Next. Oh, this is more on the 24-month bar of repeat participation. Again, professors and research scholars, 5-year maximum. It does get kind of people do ask if there's an exception. Oh, can we do another extension? There truly is not an exception to this. You get 5 years in J status. Repeat the 24-month bar, like we were just talking. You will be subject to that bar if you're in here for 1 day of a 5-year program or whatever the initial DS 2019 is issued for. If you're in there for 1 day, 24-month bar. For both the J1 principal and any J2 dependents. And just as a reminder, dependents are children or spouse. That's it. Next slide. So individuals been in the US for more than 6 months in the previous year in any status, including J2, are not eligible to enter the US for a 12-month period. So it's any J status. Time spent in a short-term program does not count towards the 12-month bar. It only applies to both the J1 principal and the dependents. 12-month bar does not prevent individuals from returning to the US in any other visa status or other categories. So the only thing that would prevent that kind of an individual would be if they're subject to the 2-year home residence requirement and they were trying to come back and say H. They could come back and even subject to a couple different classifications. So visitors who are subject to the 12-month bar are not eligible to bring in a new J program until the 12 months have passed. Next. So the 2-year home residence requirement is an actual requirement, it's pretty much in the name, to return home when you're done your program for a period of 2 years, unless you get a waiver or fulfill the requirement, which you go home for 2 years. So a few years ago, all the countries got together and each country came up with a list of skills that they see to be in short supply in their home country. So if you have those skills, you started with them from your country, or you're coming to the US to obtain those skills, there's a possibility that you will be subject to the 2-year home residence requirement. If you have US or home government funding, there's pretty much a guarantee that you will be subject to the 2-year home residence requirement. If you're sponsored by ECFMG for medical training, you are 100% subject to the 2-year home residence requirement. Next. So you can get a waiver based on exceptional hardship to you or your spouse, fear of persecution, interest of a U.S. government agency, or a no objection statement. The one we use most often is the no objection statement. And that's where the individual contacts their embassy and says, I'm in the US, I'm in J status, I'm subject to the 2-year home residence requirement, and I would like to get a waiver. The skills list is kind of older, so it's not that hard to get a waiver of the 2-year home residence requirement. Their embassy will approve it, send it over to the Department of State, they review it and approve it, and then the individual and we get a statement saying this person has a waiver of the 2-year home residence requirement. Next. The one thing that I did want to say about the waiver is that it's a long application process. And that once we do get notified that they have a waiver, we're not allowed to issue another extension of the DS 2019. That's just a Department of State rule. So the difference between the J and the H is a working status. If your staff, if you have a staff member who it's a bachelor's degree, there's people in our division who have H status. They're not engaged in research. They're not here temporarily. So that's the big difference one of the differences between the H and the J. The great thing about the H is that it recognizes dual intent. So the individual can apply for permanent residence and they could still travel and they could re-enter the US and they could apply for a visa. And at the visa application, the visa officer could say, hey, are you going to stay in the US forever? And they could say, maybe, I might not, I don't know, could. And still get the H visa. If you said that to a person applying for a J visa, if they said, like, are you going to stay permanently in the US? And that person even said, they would probably have their visa denied. Because it's a non-immigrant visa. You're not allowed to have intentions to stay in the US. So individuals get H status longer. And while the initial regulatory maximum is 6 years, you can get extensions. You can get an extension for 3-year increments as long as you have the permanent residence pending. You're in J status, you get 5 years. The end, that's it. And the nice thing about the H is that there is no 2-year home residence requirement and you don't have to run that risk. So that's why some people who are coming from abroad would definitely prefer the H so that they don't run the risk of having the 2-year home residence requirement. Next. The good thing about the J is you don't have to do an LCA. We also don't have to submit anything to USCIS or pay any fees. Issuing a DS 2019, in the time we've been speaking, I could have issued about 15 of them. It's a pretty, well, issuing the form is not that difficult. USCIS has to approve the H, and unless you premium process it, it's going to be a very, very long process. There's no application or anti-fraud fees with the J. We don't even pay anything to the Department of State for the privilege of issuing Js. And it's much easier for a J2. A J2 can come with the J1 and apply for an employment authorization document right away. The H4, who is the dependent of the H1, cannot apply for employment authorization unless the H1 primary has submitted an application for U.S. permanent residency. Next.
Okay, that's neat. So O1s, we don't do a ton of O1s because you have to really have a high level of skill and you have to have risen to the top of your field. Next slide. So O1s are employer and employment specific. So you cannot have your O1 begin working before the start date listed in the petition. They can't work after the end date in the petition. If they want to change employer, they have to file an O1 transfer petition, and they cannot start working for the new employer until it's approved. So unlike an H, there is no portability. They have to have the new approval. If someone is going to work as an O for more than one employer, they have to, each employer has to file a separate O petition. Next. There's no limit on how long someone can have O1 status, but at some point, immigration, it could be difficult if they want to apply for a green card because it only has partial dual intent. Your initial O could be up to 3 years, but extensions are in 1 year increments only, and they have to be continuing in the same position or activity for an extension. Next. Someone who is subject to the 2-year home residency requirement could apply for an O1, but they would have to go outside the US, obtain an O1 visa stamp, and re-enter. They cannot change their status in the US. Next. Next slide. There we go. The fees, of course, will go up just like they are for everyone else, but right now it's $460 application fee. Premium processing is extra. We send our O1 petitions to lawyers because they are extremely complicated petitions. They can take up to 4 months to put together an O1 petition. So the fees that the lawyers charge go from about $5,000 to $8,000. The hiring department can pay it. The O1 applicant can pay it. Either one can pay that. Only 2 law firms are allowed to file O's for Temple, and that's Emily Cohen at Green and Spiegel and Clasco. Next. Oh, that's old. Sorry, that's an old slide. Martin doesn't handle them now. Next. E3s are just for Australians. So they're very, very, very similar to an H-1B, but it's only for Australian nationals. Next. So they can be admitted for up to 2 years, and they could keep extending indefinitely. However, they don't have dual intent. So at some point, immigration might be like, hold up, you've been in E3 for a really long time. It has to still have a bachelor's degree in a specialized field. E3 spouses can apply for work permission, unlike H4s. Next. The easiest way to get E3 status is to enter from abroad. They need to get an E3 visa stamp in their passport, and then they enter the United States. We still have to do an LCA for them, but we don't file anything with USCIS if they are going to apply from outside the US. Next. If we are going to file for them when they're already in the United States, then it's very similar to an H-1B petition. And we file that with immigration. They don't have to leave. Next. This is just more about the process of what we would do for an E3. Again, it is very similar to an H-1B. Next. So someone can extend E3 status by an extension in the US, or they could travel and come back. It's easier for us if they travel and re-enter. It's much faster, but it is sometimes people don't want to travel. They don't have to necessarily travel to Australia, by the way. They could travel somewhere else. We cannot start doing an LCA for 6 months ahead of time. So if your start date is July 1, we could start working on it in January of that year. Next. So their start date will be the same day that's listed as the start date on the LCA. End date, same day listed on the LCA. Sometimes they get these I-94s from CBP, which are pretty crazy, and we don't know what's going on. But in general, that's what's supposed to happen. Next. That's it. That was pretty quick. We did have Umair, can you give us the ability to share, or do I have to? Can I do it? Let's see. Okay, so I wanted to, nope. Okay, go to our website. And, uh-oh. I think people cannot see. Can you see my screen? Oh. Wait, so I'm just curious, can people see and hear that?
No.
No, can't.
Oh, no. Okay. Joan, do you have access to Sarah's YouTube? Well-
Yes. Yes, I do.
Okay. Maybe you could share it.
You're the host. I think you should be.
Yeah, I'm trying to share it, but it says I can't.
Hold on a second. I have to make sure. I have the Research Scholar one.
Yeah, it's the Destiny one.
No, it's not on Destiny One. It's in YouTube.
Right, yeah.
So out your responsibilities of the J1 scholar.
Well, all right. If we have to, we can always just post it.
Yeah.
Here. So I will post it in the.
So really anything related to your immigration status, your 2015, your passport, your visa.
Okay, so I just posted it in the chat. So people can just click on it. And Sarah kind of talks a little bit about Destiny 1. She did that for us before she left. Oh my God. So who's playing that?
Me
Me,
Oh, okay.
sorry.
I was like, it's not
and
me.
Nina.
Yeah,
Okay. So I put it in the chat. Yeah, so people can just read that or watch that for more information. Does anyone have any questions that they want to let us know? Oh, there's some questions. Let's see. Okay, why is it so hard to get physicians? J1 waivers for physicians. Oh, okay, so Jessica is asking about J1 waivers for physicians. It is really hard. There's only 30 spots. And a J1, she's talking about Conrad 30. It's like an interested government agency that is willing to help people get a J1 waiver if they're subject based on ECFMG training. That's just the way it's set up, and there's only 30 slots. And, you know, there's a lot of physicians that have the subject requirement. It also involves an attorney, and it also involves Temple being willing to do a lot. And so that's a question for someone much more important than myself. that would be like Temple, top tier people making more decisions about Conrad 30. Can people still not see anything in the chat about the YouTube
No, I was
that
able,
Sarah did? You
I
can
was
see it? Okay.
able to find it.
Let's see. Jeffrey, if you still can't find it, let me know, and I can send it to you separately.
Sharon,
no
can you
one's
send
seeing
it
the
to me
share.
too? Because it's saying disabled.
Yeah. Okay. So you know what? I will send it out to the list so that everyone can see it. So you can review that. Does anyone have any other questions? No. So I know that there is an awful lot of information to take in. Just reach out to us with your questions. It's a lot.
Is it okay if I chime in real quick?
Sure, absolutely.
So I'm Nina Campolone. I'm the project of Office of International Student Scholar Services. So as Joan McGinley and Sharon talked about, J's can be appointed up to 5 years and H's as well. Multi-year appointments for postdocs, I do get this all the time, so I just want to make sure that everyone's aware. Multi-year appointments are permissible at Temple with postdocs. So that means you could do a 3-year, a 2-year, a 4-year. We just need to make sure that there is sufficient funding. And in those multi-year appointments, you'll get an email from me after that first year has concluded advising to submit an expense form to me, increasing their salary based on their years of experience. Now, the Office of Postdoctoral Fellow Affairs ensures that all postdocs are at least paid the minimum stipend based on their years of salary. We go by NIH. However, you're not subject to that minimum payment. If you want to pay them more than what the required salary is based on years of experience, you are most certainly allowed to do that. However, you want to keep in mind that if you bring a postdoc in at the same level of this postdoc that you are paying more than the postdoc coming in, you just need to justify why you're paying that postdoc more, especially if you have an H-1B visa coming in at the same level. Correct, Sharon? Did I say it correctly?
Yeah, right. So let's say you have 2 postdocs in your lab, both have 4 years of experience. The one, you're paying them 10,000 more than the other one. You have to be fully prepared to explain why you're paying them more, or be prepared to pay them both the same.
Yes. So I just want to make sure that everybody's aware. You are permitted to pay postdocs more than the required salary. And I would just reach out to me, and I do get this a lot, where PIs want to pay more than what is required. And we're okay with that because it's a very competitive time right now, especially with postdocs everywhere, actually, globally. So to get the best candidates, you want to be able to offer them, a nice salary. Plus, we have great fringe benefits. They're a lot at the same benefits as non-bargaining employees. So I just wanted to make sure that I covered that in case there were any questions. So if there's any questions about that, don't hesitate to reach out to me. Any other questions, maybe?
So actually there's one here. So it's not for you, but it said, can J1s live outside? Oh, did Joan answer that? Oh yeah, okay. So, okay, I think that's all the questions. Of course, if anyone has questions, just reach out to Joan or myself, or Nina if they're postdoc questions. And that's it. We're done.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone who came.
Thank you. Thank you for
Thank
conducting.
you.
You bet.
Happy Monday, everyone.
Yeah, right. All right, see you.
See you.
All right, let's see.
Good job. Let's see how you get on. I don't know how to end this. Why am I still in? End? Why am I still in this? Thank you.